Hi, everyone. We're so pleased that you're joining us today. We have a wonderful panel who will be sharing their insights and experiences at their institutions in relation to the survey results that we will be discussing. So let's go ahead and allow me to introduce myself and our panelists. My name is Terry Ann Sousa, and I am a director here at Blackboard in the Education Services Division. I am specifically focused on the area of student retention, and that is due mainly to my background. I've worked in education for over 15 years and have had experience working in higher education management in the areas of academic advising, faculty evaluation, and online teaching. Through my work with schools and institutions, serving both traditional and non-traditional students, classroom and online settings, I have implemented a broad set of student success programs. I would now like to introduce Kara Bosch, who is the Director of College Administration Support Training at Central Piedmont Community College, and let her give you a little background about herself and Central Piedmont. Kara?
Hello. I work in information technology services, delivering reporting and business intelligence solutions to all departments throughout our college to meet a variety of strategic initiatives. Central Piedmont Community College is the largest community college in North Carolina and is part of the North Carolina Community College system made up of 58 schools. CPCC serves approximately 40,000 students annually at 6 campuses, and we have a very large online campus as well.
Great, thanks, Kara. Next, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Varney, who is the Assistant Dean of Undergraduate Business in the College of Online and Continuing Education at Southern New Hampshire University. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about yourself and Southern New Hampshire?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I have been in higher education for over 20 years, taught in the classroom and online, been in advising administration and currently in academic administration. I've written extensively on proactive advising and held several leadership roles for NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising. And here at SNHU, I am one of the Assistant Deans of Undergraduate Business. We are a face-to-face and online school here at SNHU, and we have about 30,000 online students right now.
Great, thanks, Jen. Let's dive right in with our agenda. First, we're going to talk a little bit about why we are all dealing with the challenge of student retention and how today's students impact that challenge. We will then put things in the context of the survey by sharing the overview and methodology. And then we will share the findings and discuss them with our panelists. Finally, if there's time, we'll have a question and answer period. So without any further ado, let's talk about today's student and the retention challenge. Here we have a view of a path that most of us took from high school through college graduation. I know that I did. Most students applied to schools, attended, changed their majors a few times, and then graduated in 4 years. There really wasn't any other way to do it, or if there was, I wasn't told about it or no one was trying it just yet. This is what today's student journey looks like. Rising student needs and expectations have changed their path significantly. The path is definitely more complicated and clearly comes with a lot more decisions. They are thinking about schools that will most likely be able to help them get jobs, and many of them work while attending school. They're worried about cost and value. They're worried about being able to handle the academic rigor. And if at any moment they think that they are not in the right place, they will attend multiple institutions to accomplish their end goal, which is to gain skills and competencies for the right job. So, the learners of today are definitely different than the students of yesterday. Today's student now chooses where, when, and how to learn. They can do that because of the digital world they live in and the information they can discover about options. Today's student is accustomed to having everything at their fingertips and all the answers to any questions in their pocket. You might think that the new student journey that I just showed you isn't very typical just yet. But according to the National Center for Education Statistics, only 15% of students today follow that old traditional path of finding one school, applying, and staying there for 4 years. That leaves 85% of students now defined as non-traditional learners. This visual shows us that many students, 47%, are leaving for reasons that you as an organization can control and improve. The question is, who are these students? How do you figure out what their problems are so that you can let them know that your institution does indeed care? We can see that this slide is from the student's point of view. In the coming slides, we will review the perspectives of higher education leaders across different institutions and departments who are tasked with improving student retention. Let's jump into the results from our survey responders to take a closer look. In February, 8 Point Research invited select leaders from higher education to participate in a survey themed Trends in Boosting Student Retention and Completion. Candidates were invited via email, and 100 leaders responsible for enrollment and retention have participated. Today, we're going to review the findings of the research, as well as gain perspective and expertise from Jen and Kara, who are very close to these issues at their respective campuses. I also want to share with you some additional detail around who contributed to these research findings. Participants in our survey came from a few different departments across a typical campus, including 52% from student services, 25% from academic affairs, 13% from academic technology, 9% from enrollment, and 1% from financial aid. This should give us some context to consider the perspectives represented, and we will see them in more detail in a few moments. So, with an understanding of how we gathered this information and who participated in the survey, let's review some of the findings from our analysis. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to ask Jen and Kara to share their unique perspectives around the results. The first question we asked was, among the administration, how important is improving student retention and graduation rates at your school? The results were overwhelming. 90% of responders marked that student retention as an issue was of central importance to them. That's the black portion of the graph on the screen here. But we called out on the blue strip that 49% marked this issue as highest priority at their institution, and they were part of the original 90%. Also, 31% of those who marked this issue as central importance marked that student retention was amongst the most critically important, most discussed priorities on their campus. Clearly, student retention is a key focus of so many institutions, as only 1% of those who responded considered it not terribly important. I think in statistics they refer to that as an anomaly. Next, we asked our survey participants what departments or administrative job titles are most keenly concerned with student retention. This question is judged on a Likert scale of 1 to 5. 5 was most concerned. 1 was least concerned. The averages of the results are relevant to consider here. As you can see, student retention is a priority across many departments and roles, with those surveyed marking student success, student services, and academic advising and affairs as the 4 groups with the most concern. Jen, let me ask you a question. Is the consensus at your institution similar to these findings in that many roles and departments care about student retention, or do you find that certain roles are more concerned than others? Can you tell us about how this works on your campus?
Yeah, absolutely. The consensus here is very similar. We believe that all roles are important to student success and student retention, and really take a look at the student life cycle and think about all the touch points that a student has with every different department, and how can we build success and build retention into those touch points. It's really driven by our mission and vision of student success, and so all the roles and all the functions align to that overarching vision of figuring out what is it that students need to be successful and to retain, and how can we do that really at every point along the way.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Unlike Southern New Hampshire, many schools struggle with a lack of strategy and have a very disjointed approach to student retention across their departments. Building a holistic retention framework and strategy is a great starting point for improving retention at your institution. As Jennifer explained, bringing everybody together is the most successful approach. A large part of this is bringing the departments across campus together to impact a unified goal. For many institutions, this begins with reviewing the same dashboards and reports to create a single source of truth and to increase collaboration. So next we asked our survey responders, why does your institution regard student retention and graduation rates as important? Well, 66% of folks considered this the right thing to do. But we weren't too surprised at that here at Blackboard. I'm sure everyone on this webinar considers this the right thing to do. An altruistic mission at all schools should be the norm. Let's discuss a few of these items in a little bit more closely though. More than just pure altruism, student retention is now a priority of institutional leadership, with 65% of respondents claiming that it is being addressed from the highest levels of their administration. But why is it a priority from the top down? Competition is increasing for qualified students in a time when enrollments are declining, which means that institutions at all levels are attempting to keep those students that they worked so hard to recruit and enroll. It simply costs less to retain the students than it is to recruit and enroll new ones. This is particularly important at a time when higher education institutions are under increasing financial pressure. The public policy shift at state and federal levels to include performance-based funding models that not only look at enrollment numbers but also include graduation and completion rates as a part of the funding calculation is creating financial incentive for institutions to get their students to completion. Remember, the journey of the student that we reviewed earlier. Students have a lot of choices, and they will be making decisions around their future, and some of those decisions will impact whether or not they choose to stay at any one institution. This issue of increased competition is backed up by this survey, with 57% of responders saying that competition was in fact relevant for them. Further, now that tuition funding is becoming more and more reliant on graduation rates, 52% of responders have noted that this is an issue for them. All of this makes sense given that more than half of the United States has implemented some type of performance-based funding model, or at least in transition to doing so. So let me stop here and ask both Jen and Kara. Kara, North Carolina is a state that is listed as already implementing performance-based funding, and Jen, New Hampshire falls into the group that doesn't face performance-based funding models. I'm going to ask both of you, starting with Kara. Why and how did your institutions decide to make investments in data-driven decision-making to help students succeed? And did your decision fall into one of the categories listed on this slide, or is there another reason?
Well, I would say it falls into several of these reasons, but definitely these categories. CVCC, like all the North Carolina community colleges, began the shift to a data-driven decision-making, performance measures many years ago with the establishment of annual state goals. They had very specific targets customized to each college, and it did directly impact our funding. However, the need for a tool that provides data really gained momentum when CVCC became part of the Gates Foundation Achieving the Dream Initiative and the Completion by Design program in North Carolina. The selection of the BI tool was supportive of our administration to achieve those goals, and they aided in the success and the user adoption of the dashboards and reports. Our administration saw that higher education as a whole was shifting to this culture of evidence and wanted to be ahead of the curve. So it's easy to prove that return on investment to get them to buy into the technology, with our college being part of these major initiatives. So in order to achieve that maximum funding and meet the strategic goals of the college, we needed to create that culture of evidence throughout the college, because student success was not just the responsibility of one department, but all the departments. So the purchase of a tool to deliver the data accurately and efficiently became the obvious step for us.
Yep, definitely sounds like you have a combination of the reasons under your belt for why you implemented the strategic approaches you did at your campus. Jen, how about you? You don't have performance-based funding in New Hampshire. Can you tell us about your administration and what reasons from this survey agree with what's happening on your campus?
Sure. So truly, the top two reasons are the reasons that we invested in data-driven decision-making for student retention and graduation reports, and you know, some also of some competitiveness with other colleges, and helping us to attract superior students, but also helping us to help all students. We really made the investment for a reason that's not necessarily on this list. As we broaden our admission scope and enrolled student population with increasingly diverse academic background preparation, we found that we could really no longer take a one-size-fits-all approach to helping students retain and be successful. And so as this, we figured, well, okay, the only way to really do that and to figure out how to work with different groups of students was to use a data-driven approach. So we started small and looked at a certain group of students and used data to figure out what was working for them. And then that just kind of evolved into total data-driven decision-making.
So clearly we have here that it's obviously, I think the altruistic piece is the great side effect of having our administration state this as a top priority. I think that's the case for both Kara and Jen. That's at least what I take away from it. So next we asked, do you use data to direct your student retention programs and tactics? And as you can see, the overwhelming majority of individuals who answered the survey do in fact use data. But just how easy is it to access that data that might help you improve student retention? This question was also rated on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 meaning that data was readily accessible, and 1 at the other end of the spectrum that data was nearly impossible to access. In this orange slice on the screen, we can see that only 24% of individuals surveyed had noted that their data is readily accessible. That leaves 76% who are struggling to unlock the information that will allow them to identify at-risk students and refine their student retention programs. Kara, I'm going to ask you, how do you get data out of your campus systems? What do you use it for? Are you part of the 76% or the 24% who consider that information readily accessible?
Well, since I'm one of the people responsible for getting the data to the people, I certainly hope our users would say that CP2C is in the 24% here. Our dashboards and reports were not an IT creation. Although we do the mechanics to extract the data from our ERP system, we really involved the people from departments all over the college to help design the dashboards and develop those key performance indicators and tell us what business problems they were trying to solve. During the design phase of the dashboards, that helped shape how they were going to use it. The goal from the beginning was to make this a user tool so that users could have the data in front of them during their meetings and their conference calls, et cetera, and really work with the data to answer the questions and develop the policies, and ultimately to track what is working and what is not working. And that's how we hope our folks are using the tool. And by letting them design it a little bit, that kind of guided that use.
That's great to know. So next we asked, what factors are decreasing the usability of your institution's data? The top 3 factors were that showed that decreasing the usability of campus data are the following. The blue shows that data existed in many places in silos. That was 52%. The resources don't exist to do the proper analysis. That was 48%. Individuals can't easily access their data or get reports. That was 36%. These are themes and challenges that we hear often when talking to institutions across the country. So, Kara, again, to call on you, I know that Central Piedmont faced a lot of these similar challenges. How did your institution solve these problems? And can you talk a bit about how Blackboard was able to help you with them?
Certainly. Yeah, I spoke earlier about our intention to use Blackboard Analytics as a tool for our users. But it was important to us that all of our users were using data in common, that they were comparing apples to apples when they came to that table for the discussion. Implementing the tool with common measurements and definitions was important if cross-functional teams were going to be sharing the data. That's why we had stakeholders from all the departments related to the data included in the implementation design, because you have to remember they were coming from a world where either IPS built them a custom report, which was based on very subjective criteria, or they had kept data in Excel spreadsheets, and everyone was coming to the discussion with their own data, measured in their own way, using their own time frames. The implementation of Blackboard Analytics brings them all together with common measurements and time frames and definitions, and it makes the comparisons easier and more accurate. So hopefully the decisions should be easier and more accurate as well. That's what we're hoping. So any kind of common terminology and definitions, a BI tool will help with that. If you can get everyone to the table to agree on what those are.
Right. Do you think that having that common tool and getting everybody to see the same numbers helped with breaking down those silos and getting people to work together for that one common goal?
Oh, definitely, because there's not, they don't spend all the time negotiating on whose data is most accurate or where it came from. Everybody knows where it came from and with the accuracy of the data. So there's not that discussion. So they come to the table already working with the same apples. So everybody's happy.
I would imagine that's definitely a head start to dealing with student retention. All right, let's move on. Next we asked, do you have student success programs in place? Virtually everyone said, 95% in fact, that they have success programs in place. But how did they know that these programs are influencing retention and could actually be considered successful? So next we asked, how would you rate the overall effectiveness of the programs your school has in place designed to boost student success and retention rate? This question was also rated on a scale of 1 to 5 and marked, with 5 marked as programs effective at retaining students and 1 marked on the other end of the spectrum as programs that don't seem to be working. Overall, institutions marked themselves quite highly in this area, saying that the programs they have in place seem to be effective with an average score of 3.67. I have to give my personal surprise here that in my previous role, I found that it was quite difficult to track the success of our programs without access to certain data. Much of the information I was looking for was controlled or managed by another department, and sometimes politics or process got in the way of getting to the answers we needed to make improvements to those programs. So I would have been very envious of Kara's situation that she just described, having everybody work on the same page. But Jen, let me ask you, can you speak to the programs that you have in place and how you determine whether or not they're successful?
Sure. So, you know, it's interesting because I think sometimes people get caught up in the notion of something having to be called a success program in order to, you know, have a positive impact on students. But I almost think that student success programs really just result in, or they can be qualified as just a mindset towards student success. But anyway, so everything that we do based on or for student success really is grounded in the theory of proactive advising, where it's not a reactive mode at all. We don't wait for students to come to us with questions or concerns or how do I or what if. We try to anticipate what it is that the students need, sort of based on history, based on our relationships with students, based on where we are in the term calendar, term structure, what things students typically face during that time. And from using this proactive perspective, then we look, like I was saying earlier, at all the touch points in the student life cycle and think about how is it that we can use this proactive nature at all of these touch points in order to help our students be successful. And as needs are identified, and it really is a process of continuous improvement, so as needs are identified, remediations are put into place. So for example, one of the newer things that we've done lately is we've identified a need for a significant percentage of students for some writing help. And so we put into place a homegrown writing center, which started as a pilot, and it's still growing. But that really is kind of how the culture works around here, is that, you know, needs are identified, and then a pilot is also identified, typically very low cost, where we can try out these things. And we absolutely do measure whether or not they are successful. Because things begin in pilot form, it's kind of easy because you can use a control group and you can really watch them and see if they're, you know, making improvements, for example, in writing or things of that nature. And then you can tweak the program as you go. And then certainly things that are found to be successful will grow, and things that are completely unsuccessful are scrapped. But that doesn't happen very often. Typically it ends up that an initiative that was born out of someplace within the organization, some student touch point, ends up getting refined and then rolled out to the whole university or the whole online population.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that student success programs, just because they have the label student success doesn't mean that that's the only thing happening on campus to help a student be successful. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that on one of the slides in the future, but it could be as simple as changing a policy on campus that makes things easier for students to access a particular library section, or get something at the student center that would help them move on. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is definitely something that we shouldn't be too laser focused on. And you did say that you don't really have programs that maybe didn't do as well as you would have liked. Was there anything that you can think of off the top of your head that maybe you would have liked to have seen do better, and maybe you didn't cancel the program, but maybe you just used some data to figure out how you could improve it?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And so I also wanted to go back to the comment that you just made about student success programs not being the only thing on campus that positively impacts success. I think that that's absolutely spot on, and I think sometimes what happens is people get caught up in the notion of oh, the only way that I can positively impact success is if I, you know, create this huge overarching program, when actually incremental changes, like the one you mentioned about changing the policy, can really make an enormous difference. So I think that's a great point to bring up. As far as initiatives that I guess I thought maybe could have been better, it really, I'm thinking maybe of something around faculty development. So I do a lot now with faculty development, thinking about how to really teach the students that are in our courses, and thinking about, you know, adult learning theory and the things that adults need in the classroom, and especially in the online classroom, and how can we best deliver the curriculum in a way that meets their needs. And so sometimes we try things that don't have the desired effect that we're looking for, and so we end up tweaking them. Let's see, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I mean, sometimes we end up having to tweak, let's say, the prompt for an assignment or something, because it's not, the students aren't understanding what it is that the assignment is supposed to deliver. I know it's a really micro example, but I think it's also an example of how, like I was saying earlier, incremental changes can really make a big difference sort of down the road.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think sometimes it can go from faculty participation to, as we discussed, collaboration across all the departments, knowing which students to talk to, even like we said, policy changes. I don't think it's that micro, because if 10 students are having a problem with one particular section of a class, or they're having trouble with the financial aid office, that makes a big impact on their experience. And as we talked about before, you know, today's student is watching all of that and is affected by all of that. So I think it's good that we're on top of and looking at every little aspect of the campus. But to your point, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we just tweak it and move on. So let's move on to this next one. We asked what student services currently in place are considered critical to student retention and success. For this question, we asked participants to mark all services currently in place. Our survey participants remarked that 1, academic advising, 2, freshman help programs, and 3, mentoring rose to the top of current programs considered to have a critical impact on student retention. We have marked these 3 areas on our screen in red for your attention. Jen, what is your opinion of why academic advising is ranked so high here? What is it about these top 3 programs that make them so critical?
That's a great question. I mean, the advising literature clearly demonstrates that students who are able to make some sort of a connection of significance with somebody on a university campus are more likely to retain and persist than those that are unable to make those connections. And I think that's really why the top 3 things in red are listed as the top 3, is because they all involve some kind of student connection, some way for a student to make a connection with somebody on the campus that will really help to support them throughout the program, or even just in the time when they need it. So proactive advising is one way to look at that, or being a proactive is one way to look at it. But really those connections don't necessarily even have to be made through advising. I mean, they can be made through anybody. In a freshman help program, or in a peer mentoring, it could be another student, it could be the mentor, it could be the tutor, it could even be, you know, somebody like the housekeeper on the floor of the dorm. It's all about helping students to find ways to build those connections. And like I said, I really believe that's why folks rate those top 3 things so high.
Right. You know, you and I have talked about intrusive advising playing a major role here, and that proactive outreach is part of that. But talk to us a little bit about how you deal with your at-risk students through those departments, and what that does for those students.
Sure. So proactive advising, like we said, is really all about anticipating students' needs and kind of answering them and helping the students before sometimes even they have identified that they have a need. And so it involves work on the back end as far as, you know, framing up a process of proactive advising, but even just thinking about looking at the different touch points in a student's activity. So let's say, you know, you wanted to look at how a student registers for a class, and so you maybe think about, well, what are the different points of that, and then are there any pain points in there, and how can we remediate those pain points so that that whole process is easier for a student? Because honestly, the last thing we want to do is make registering for a class difficult for a student, because that's not going to motivate them to persist, certainly.
Right. So targeting at-risk students, is that a key piece, or do you just kind of take a general, holistic, trying to get to everyone?
Well, I think you start with trying to get to everyone, and when you're trying to get to everyone, or more importantly, I guess let's back it up a little bit. When you're looking over a process, you're looking at it from how can I get to everyone, and I think as the process unfolds, or as you really pay intentional mind to who's going through the process, then the points related specifically to at-risk students start to come up. So, for example, you read a lot in the literature about first-generation college students trying to go through the financial aid process, and how there are concerns out there about students not understanding what that process involves, and that ends up becoming a roadblock. So that student could be considered at risk because of their lack of background knowledge as to how to go through the financial aid process, or how to understand their degree plan, or how to, in an online course, make a post that is coherent and that will be understood by other folks. So I think you can really look at it. You start from the high level, and then you're able to hone in on different student populations as you really analyze students going through the process.
Right. And do you find that if you can give those students some more attention that they do, have you tracked to see if they do better?
Yes, and that also it goes back to the trial and error that we talked about earlier, because certainly not everything works. But yes, we do track them. We do pay attention to students as they're going through the process and any amended processes that we've made, and measure whether or not the remediations that we've made are successful. And if they are, then like I was saying earlier, we expand them, and if not, then we retool them, typically tweak them, and then try again.
Great. Just out of curiosity, we've talked before about how it's not just student success programs that help. Do you know of any policy changes that have helped your students, maybe in the financial aid office or through student services, that have made the process for students easier that you think might have helped?
Sure. A couple of years ago, we went through a process of reorganizing our financial aid and the bursar's office. So that used to be it used to actually be 3 distinct offices. So you'd have the financial aid office, you'd have the bursar's office for student billing, and then you'd have the registrar's office for registration. And students were kind of doing the circle back and forth and carry the paper back and forth from one place to another. And so a couple of years ago, we actually went through an initiative where we combined all that into a one-stop. And so that one-stop, and there is some things in the literature about that as well, but that one-stop process has really made life so much easier for students. And we've been able to replicate that with our online students. So now there's one stop physically on campus for the campus students, and then there's also a web-based one stop and folks on the phones for our online students, which has really made their life easier, because then they're not sent from office to office to office trying to figure out the right process and bring the right papers.
Yep, so you're totally addressing today's student and letting them have everything they need right at their fingertips.
That's what we're hoping to do, because as you said earlier, we recognize that students are busy. They have a lot of things tugging at them, and those charts that you put up at the beginning were really just so indicative of what our students seem to be living every day. And so I think the easier that we can make things for them, and the better we're able to help them focus only on their coursework and not some of the red tape that sometimes accompanies being a student, the better off it's going to be for them.
Great. I'm completely in agreement. I'm sure our audience is too, and can recognize some of those things working or not working on their campuses. Okay, I don't want to run out of time, and I'm trying to leave some time for questions, so let's move on to the next slide. We asked our folks, which student dimensions do you find most effective in understanding students, their satisfaction, risk of failure, and retention? Participants were asked to mark any and all dimensions that applied. And 72% of the individuals surveyed found that student performance in particular courses and feedback from faculty were top factors to consider as having a correlation to student retention. GPA trends year over year are also considered significant by this group, with 67% responding. Other personal data, including student demographics, also ranked really high, with 64% responding. Kara, let me ask you, what can you talk about some of the dimensions that your institution reviews, or what can you tell us about some of the dimensions that your institution reviews? Do you use the ones that are that came from this survey? And do you have any information or insight that maybe surprised you or that we're not thinking about from this graph that we're looking at?
Yes, we use most of these. These seem to be similar to what I think most colleges face, the measures they're trying to gather, except for the residency one. We're a non-residential campus, but student retention and completion are very important to us, and to gather all that, we measure term-to-term retention of students, especially when tracking our first-year students. Our first-generation students are very important for us to walk them through what could be an alien environment, you know, getting the financial aid, or enrolling in courses, going through all those steps. So we really track their success in getting enrolled in a program. We don't really have majors as much as we have programs. So we track that we've got all of our students enrolled in a program. And then we track different successes in our gateway courses, the beginning math and English courses, which I see are part of the measures, the dimensions that are shown here, their math performance and aptitude, their English performance and aptitude. We track all of those things to try and improve the success, and we track it with different groups of students, like you show the personal data, first generation, military, adult learner. All of those things are important in identifying special programs to walk these groups through their first year, their onboarding. Because if you can keep them through the first year, I think we can keep them for the long haul. And so we do our best to measure all of those. We track degrees and certificates that are awarded by this program to gather our completion data. Are they actually completing the degree certificates to move on to a 4-year institution? Are they completing a 2-year degree here? And the surprising things was the differences in the experiences for our first generation students, and watching that particular cohort of students move through all the different steps of selecting a program and seeing that that really does improve their success, and getting them onboarded and through mandatory involvement and all of that good stuff.
Right. So based on the way you're talking, I'm guessing you have seen significant improvements once you started tracking all of this information.
Yes, we use the numbers to determine whether or not our programs are successful. I can't speak to specifically which ones were successful and were not, but I know that we've changed up a few because I'm the data person, and so when they see the numbers aren't moving the way they want, they will actually go look at an initiative and change it out, or approach it in a different way to try and make sure these cohorts of students are moving through the process and really being successful.
Right. So the folks on your campus come to you and say, can you show us this and tell us how these students are doing? And that's how you're figuring out that they're changing it up.
Oh, yes, definitely.
That's great. That's great. Just off the cuff here, what's the strangest thing you've been asked, or what you thought sounded strange?
You will not believe it, but I did once get asked if we could track the classes, the success in classes that were near the coffee shop, because if they were getting the coffee before they went to class, maybe they were more successful, you know, and I couldn't do that because the coffee shop we don't really track that in our ERP system. So I'm doing that for them. But that was one of the strangest requests I've gotten. There's a lot of them, but that was one of the oddest.
We'll have to get that built in to our database. See if we can get that in the ERP, right?
Oh yeah, sure, we'll do that.
You know, it's funny you say that. I have actually heard of campuses I think there was one in New Jersey that I talked to that they literally decided to build a coffee shop in the middle of their campus to keep students there because they were a commuter campus as well and they wanted to know. So maybe it's not so strange. Okay, so what have we learned? Let's tie all of this together and review some of the key perspectives that we considered today. First, we talked about today's student and how he or she is different from the past. Most telling, we noted that institutions are facing learners who may be underprepared. First generation simply have more choices about where, when, and how they're completing their educational path. We also reviewed that students are more likely to leave an institution because they think that their college or university just doesn't care, along with the traditional metrics that we talked about, like learner demographics and GPA performance. But still, the question remains, how do we identify these students? Next, we reviewed survey findings from institutional leadership that spoke to the new pressures confronted by higher education from these changing modalities. Performance-based funding, now adopted in 50% of the United States, and much of it tied to completion rates, is bringing colleges and universities higher competition and less margin for error. This has made student retention a key priority for our institutions and causes us to ask another question. How do you bring disparate departments on campuses into collaboration with one another, build your strategy and program, and track the results? The best way to increase retention and graduation rates is to develop and implement a holistic solution. So to accomplish this, you need to use data to inform decisions and identify students who will need support before they fall into an at-risk category. You need to have a plan and make sure that that plan includes having all departments on campus work together, and provide success programming using modern technology to help and track the identified students. We have researched the challenges that many institutions are facing at a deep level. Blackboard has also talked to many of our customers, and the bottom line is retaining students is a complex matter. There is no silver bullet or immediate action that you can take to make your completion rates increase. We all want students to be successful. We know that academic advising is one of the top ways to avoid that student loss. At a recent NACADA conference, which is the National Academic Advising Association, the keynote speaker pointed out that academic advisors deal with the students on a daily basis, and they are in the best position to address their needs, whether they're academic, social, or otherwise. He went on to say that companies out there are tools to empower the academic advisors that cannot be the only answer. In my view, Blackboard has the software and services to help you with a holistic strategy that is needed to increase student retention. Once you have your strategy in place, you will have the necessary time to focus on what matters, and that's the success of your students. What we have learned today, especially from Kara and Jen, is that if institutions identify and engage their students through a holistic approach, they will improve their retention rates. So I did get through that. I hope not too quickly, but we can get some questions from the audience. We've been tracking them. My colleagues who are behind the scenes have been monitoring the chat room for us, and they've sent me some of these questions from the audience. So let's see, reading through them. Kara, this question's for you. How did you get the funding for the capital investment into analytics?
A lot of crying and begging. Well, I have to tell you, it was like the alignment of the planets was perfect, because at the same time that we were being inundated with all these requests for data, the administration of the college saw that we had these major initiatives that the college was on. And all we had to do was prove that the funding for the tool would support those initiatives and how efficient it would be, and really that it would, we did our ROI study and showed how much time we were spending trying to develop custom solutions and how much time people were spending just trying to negotiate their way through masses of data that nobody really understood, when we could just provide them one tool and do it a lot easier, that they did agree that the funding was worth it, the investment was worth it, and that we would get the return from it pretty quickly, actually.
All right, so now I'm going to ask you a really hard question. How did you prove it, that you needed it? Other than the planets aligning.
Yes, other than the planets aligning. You know, we kept records of report requests and data requests. We also, and this was a big important one, we related the report requests we were getting directly to the strategic goals of the college. And we proved that we could get the data they needed to make the goals, to meet the goals and be successful, not only with the strategic goals of the college, but with those national initiatives. And since funding and our college's reputation and all of these things were on the line, it became very important. So that's how we proved it. We were able to take our prior experience and all the data they were asking for and just line it up with those goals and really show them graphically, actually, and big PowerPoint presentations, and explain to them, you're asking us for all of this to achieve this goal. If you have this, we can do it in, if you let us implement Blackboard, we can do it in 6 months. If we have to do it manually, it's going to take us 3 years. That's the kind of stuff we did.
Great, great. And I would imagine, as a follow-up to this question, because it's a good question, has Blackboard made it easier for you to show that certain programs are working and not working and getting funding? And I realize that's not necessarily your area, but if you know about Central Piedmont?
Our users love it, and if they're happy, I'm happy. And since our users are the people who are making the decisions and implementing these new programs, their deans, their administrators, their program chairs, and they're also the finance people and the administrators of the college, and they're all using the data, and they're turning out programs, and we keep winning awards, so I'm saying that we're successful.
Okay, good.
Our students are happy.
That's good. That's good. That's definitely a sign of success, without a doubt. Jen, I see a question for you. It says, we don't have the money for a big first-year program or professional advising. What can we do to get things moving?
That's a good question. And we touched on this a little bit before, and we can certainly talk more about it. Student success programs don't need to be these big, elaborate programs that cost a lot of money. It really is about starting small. It's about looking at, really thinking about, look at the literature, of course, and then think about, what is it, where can we create some touch points, or where can we, who can it be that can be that person that the student can make a connection with here on our campus? And, sometimes it is a faculty member, sometimes it's someone in student services, sometimes it's an RA. It really could be, it really is anybody. That's the thing. And so if everybody is of the same mindset that everyone's job is to help students be successful and complete their goals, then everyone becomes a potential piece of a student success network that really doesn't have to cost anything. So again, it just makes sense to look at the research on advising and think about what are we seeing with students, and how can we translate some of these things that are in the research into some of the other service providing areas of our organization, especially when we don't have professional advisors. And again, pilot with initiatives, which is a really great way to do it. Just small things with test groups of students to prove, to demonstrate their value or not. And honestly, another thing is just advise or be proactively advise students by walking around. So it doesn't even mean that it's a role and this very expensive thing that has to happen. As you're walking around your campus and you're interacting with students, chat with them. See what's working, what do they like, what do they need, what are they concerned about, how do they, do they appear stressed about something? If they're all hanging out at the coffee shop, which certainly seems to be a common thread on all of our campuses, that's a place to go hang out and advise by walking around and see what information you can gain, because it really, it's surprising how little effort it takes to really get some great information and then to kind of roll with it from there.
So again, another quick follow-up, and we're running out of time, but is there some small data pieces that if you don't have a big Blackboard Analytics, or there's some other way to get to something to track what's happening at your campus, would you say that's a good place to start to looking to pilot something small?
I think it can be, but I also think that it's important not to get so tied up and buried in looking for a place to start that you fail to start. So I think sometimes it takes a qualitative look, around what's going on, what seems to be, what am I concerned about, or more importantly, what are my students concerned about? And then once you have a focus area, then maybe drilling into the data and see what you can find from there, but definitely not getting tied into knots by it.
Absolutely. So collaboration is key.
Yeah, collaboration, really just keeping your eyes open, walking around and thinking about, what is it that we can improve on? What is it that we've done here for years and years, and we've done it because it's always been done this way, and, what related to that, what could potentially be something that's causing students some trouble?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm going to stop here with 2 minutes left so that we can share some follow-up information. I want to thank you all for joining us today so that we could get all of this important information out to you. And if we didn't get to your answer in